I know that the reason I was here is because of the murder of one of our professors in December of 2016. And the university did a campus-wide study to look at what were our best practices, what were the changes that needed to be done, where did we need to go. And because of that, we created this position, but more importantly, the office that I don't know, embedded in, I guess is the right word. And what we found is that most other organizations, people in my position will either report to the chief of police or the head of counseling, and I like both of them very much. Personally and professionally, they're very, very good. But by being in the position I am, where I report through the provost office, it gives me a lateral freedom and lateral movement that no other university has. I've been getting contacted by a number of my colleagues at other universities asking about how we are set up. They want to set up much in the way that we have. So I think we're going to see that what we're doing here at USC is going to be the model for, we think, for all other universities. My job is to assist, to provide collaborative oversight to all the various departments, schools, but also human resources when we look at potential issues with staff, with our faculty senate, when we look at potential issues with faculty. And my job is to assist throughout the university in identifying potential areas of risk and then creating mitigation plans to lower that risk. I've done thousands of assessments. And thank God most people are not going to hurt anybody. They're not going to, certainly not going to kill anybody. But they scare people. So part of the challenge for me is not only to determine what is the actual risk in a given situation, but how then do we manage fear? How do we manage the disruption that behavior is created? Most of my cases turn out to be low risk. I use a very simple typology, low, moderate, high. I think the FBI has low, moderate, high, imminent. We can call it whatever we want, and we're all on the same page. But if somebody even is a low risk, but they're disrupting their school, they're disrupting their fellow students, they're disrupting their coworkers, that's not okay. People shouldn't be afraid to come to this campus. We want people to come here. We want people to thrive. We want people to grow. And so my office was created in the Office of Campus Wellness and Crisis Intervention. This is not a one-stop shop, but we really look at the range of human experience, and we try to here at this university create resources and tools so that we look at wellness. When I was coming up, and maybe not that long ago, I used to think of wellness, okay, healthy eating, exercise, time management, stress management, which, by the way, are fundamental elements. But it also means things like connectivity to other humans. It means future orientation. It means a sense of meaning and purpose. That's wellness. If we help all of our communities and we help all of our constituents become well and to move into wellness, then we don't need a whole lot of risk assessment because folks are much less likely to be violent. Having said that, some folks are unhealthy. It's a hard world we live in. And so my job is to get involved to identify risk. One of the other problems we have, though, is that we often think of the Office of Chief Threat Officer is to, I get involved when somebody makes a threat. That was one of the first questions in the first meeting I had when I came to this campus. One of my colleagues said, so, okay, we call you when a threat's been made. And I said, no. One of the hard truths of my business, most people who make threats never hurt anybody. Most people who hurt somebody never made a threat. But everybody who hurt somebody acted in a threatening manner. They did things that were discomforting, whether they created fear or discomfort or illness of ease, whatever we want to call it. People knew something was wrong. That's when I want to get involved. And in graduate school, we learned I think it's the law of false positives. If you don't have a lot of false positives, a lot of cases where there really isn't an imminent risk, then we're going to miss the true positive. I like getting called from different schools, from different organizations on campus when they say, we've got a situation and we're not really sure how big it is. Let's talk. That's where we want to get involved. So now what we do then is we start to identify areas of concern. We look at health and wellness initiatives that we can bring to bear, and we've got some great resources. And unfortunately, we will have crises, and crises are defined in many ways. And so the third part of our office is in support, advocacy, but also crisis response. And then how do we manage and how do we deal with the aftermath? So it's not just the big kinds of events. The little ones count too.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you do when you get a phone call, when you start evaluating a threat? What do you look for?
Well, the first thing I really want to know is what's going on. Behavior doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's always a backstory. So if somebody, and by the way, how long has this been going on? I do understand that we tell folks, we want folks to get a hold of us early, to involve us, you know, as quickly as possible. Truth is, things have to develop, and they have to have a critical mass before people finally say, you know, I need to report this, I need to tell somebody. So we try to understand the broader picture. I try to understand the backstory, the history. Why now? What's different? If we hear this a lot, well, he's been doing this for years. Then why'd you call us now? Because if he's been doing this for years, my bet is he'll keep doing this for more years. What's different? And often there is something different, but they don't know how to articulate it. And so we try to help understand that. And then we have to try to figure out how do we get information. I've been very fortunate. DPS, there's a sergeant who is a liaison from my office to DPS. I've got a graduate assistant who's very skilled at researching. We have a really good relationship with judicial affairs, with our student support, with students affairs. This university has been very gracious to me. But what I find is it's very interested in making sure we do the right thing. So we try to get the backstory. Then we have to decide how to reach out, how to get more. Do we need to interview some people? Never forget, everything we do has an impact, for better or worse. And some folks in my business like to rush out and interview everybody. Well, sometimes that's appropriate, but sometimes it takes a bad situation and makes it worse. So if we get involved, how do we do so in a way that doesn't harm people's reputation, doesn't interfere with their academic success, that doesn't cause them harm? So that's really what we spend a lot of our time trying to do. What do we know? How did we get here? What might make it different? I look at the individual of concern, but I also look at that environment around them. People respond to their environment. How do we assess that? How do people treat each other? How do people talk to each other? I worked a shooting years ago, many years ago, where a fellow was at a company and he was told he was going to be disciplined, and he went to his toolbox and got a pistol. And then he walked through the facility and shot and killed 4 supervisors. He puts the gun in his pocket, and it's a big facility. There was a lot of management there, but most of the supervisors of another facility for a meeting, they weren't there. Otherwise, he probably would have shot them too. He puts the gun in his pocket and he's walking out. And later we interviewed him in jail and we asked him, where are you going to go? And he's heading to the other meeting to kill more people. As he was walking out, a supervisor came in from the loading dock. He'd been out on a cigarette break. The fellow took the pistol out of his pocket, put it in the man's face, and said, I just killed 4 of the supervisors, I should kill you. And then he said something unbelievable. He said, you know, you've always been okay to me. And he put the gun in his pocket and he walked on by. And it got me thinking, how do we treat folks? Not that these other folks deserve to get shot. They didn't. And people perceive things and they act on their perceptions. We got ripped off a little bit by psychology back in the 70s and 80s when they said perception is reality. No, it's not. Reality is reality. But people act on their perceptions. So the challenge we have is what's going on, how long, why, and that's the big question. People don't understand it. The why is everything, because then we have a better idea how to get out in front of it. How do we redirect it? I was a reserve officer at LAPD for 25 years. I don't mind arresting folks. Some people need to go to jail. Some people need to leave this university. Some folks need to be redirected. Some folks need counseling. Some people need you know, other resources. And by the way, some folks have complaints that aren't always wrong. It doesn't excuse violence. It doesn't excuse hurting. But if we're doing something wrong, we need to fix it. So that really becomes my overall goal and overarching, you know, really mission. How do we identify vulnerability? How do we get involved early in the process? And then how do we manage it or mitigate that risk over the long run? And that's what I do.
And I've asked you earlier about the range that you guys cover. Right. What kinds of cases fall under your purview? Well,
we have people who make threats. We've had staff make threats to their co-students or to faculty or to coworkers, depending on their positions. We've had people act in ways that are scaring people. I would say that the largest, I guess, source of cases is that when somebody's acting in ways that's just creating a lot of fear and distress. And people will come forward and say, I'm afraid to be around this person.
And how do you manage that?
Well, we have to understand, number one, are they at risk? Is there a danger? And that's a big deal, because what ends up happening is, statistically, and I'm not a gambler, so I don't play the odds, but statistically I know most cases are not high risk. Most cases they're not going to hurt folks for a lot of reasons. The problem we have is that the warning signs, we talk about those, the isolated, the simmering anger, the sense of being done wrong, all those kinds of long-term grievances, probably signs of depression, isolation. Those are easy to see. The counter kind of things are harder to see, but more important, future orientation, a sense of moral binding that doesn't allow them to hurt folks. Those are much more important and hard to see. So we get a lot of cases that come in where people say, we're terribly afraid. As we assess and as we look at it more carefully, we can determine whether or not someone's on that pathway to violence. We really can. So let's say I decide it's low risk. And I don't do it in isolation. I work with our partners, but we decide it's low risk. Now we have to still manage the fear. I guess what I try to do is answer 3 questions. Number 1, does the person of concern pose a low, moderate, imminent risk of violence? Number 2, even if it's low risk, are they engaging in behaviors which would reasonably create fear and discomfort? And if number 2 is yes, under what conditions would it get worse? Under what conditions will it get better? And how do we certainly maximize the latter and minimize the former? How do we intervene to address the behavior and address the fear? So part of what we are asking is we're asking members of the university to have faith. And I think it's a small leap of faith, but it's a leap of faith. We have to make sure we do our job right. They have to trust that we give it due consideration, that we look at it from their perspective, that we understand the dynamics, and that we will reassess. And that's another huge element of our commitment. Risk is not a static state. It's not a genetic predisposition. People are not violent or not violent. It's a person is violent or not violent within this context, within this set of circumstances. So if I decide or we decide somebody's low risk today, as we as a university do things, maybe we try to redirect, we get them to counseling, maybe administratively there's actions that are taken, let's reassess. Did it get better, did it get worse? And I think that's the other commitment we have, is to stay with the case and to continue to monitor it as circumstances change.
And I spoke with Sergeant Voida, who I think is your DPS liaison, yeah, and he talked about how hands-on the office is. Why is that important?
Well, 2 reasons. One, I think people need to trust us, and if they see us and they feel us, then they know we actually know what we're talking about. I spend very little time in the office. I think people wonder where I am most of the time. But I want to go to the school. I want to go to the department. I want to go meet with the folks that are there. I want to see their world, because ultimately our interventions are going to take place in their world. That's a part of it. But the other part is that my job isn't just to assess risk, it's also to influence behavior. And to the extent that we are close, that we are engaged, we have more opportunities to help influence the behavior for the better. And I think that's why we are so engaged.
And you talked also about how USC is regarded as one of the leading universities in this now. Right. What makes it different? What makes USC special?
I think it's the ability to move across schools and units. I think that's a big deal. I think the other piece is that we have the ability to manage the case much longer term. And then I think by being embedded, as I am within the university, I can work very easily with judicial affairs, with our Center for Work Family Life, our internal EAP. I work with HR. I think it has that ability to move across. Also, you know, I have a certain degree of, I don't know, status. I mean, I have a high enough position. Most folks don't have a position with this much authority. And I don't, have a whole lot of muscle, but I do have the ability then to insert myself where in many other universities they wait for cases to come to them. And then what they'll do is they'll do the assessment and move on to the next case. We give a commitment to not only assess, but to work with and monitor throughout the process.
So you talked a lot about assessment and about what to do before threats and when you get threats. What about those instances when no one saw it coming? They
don't exist. No one ever just snaps. There's always this pathway, this build-up. The example I use, and you're too young, but I've got 6 children. My baby's 22, and my oldest is 36. And so one of the things we do as a parent, we see our children engaging in patterns of behavior. We project out the likely consequence of them continuing that behavior, and many times, and we always tell our kids, and your parents told you, you need to cut that out. And our kids will say, but I'm not going to. See, I know you're not going to. You're going to cut it out now. If you stop that behavior here, they can't get to the end. There's an old bumper sticker in AA that I love that says you won't slip if you don't go to slippery places. You can't act out violently without going through a number of other processes. Some folks take years to get down that pathway. Some people, and here's where it gets tough, that movement is fairly quick. Within our environment, we want to make sure that we're nimble, and that's where Sergeant Voida really, I think, was referring to this notion of being hands-on, by being nimble, by being able to pivot quickly. We can get involved and find folks on this pathway, and let's divert them. They want something, and sometimes some of the things they want are not wrong. How they're doing it is. So let's intervene in a meaningful way, and let's change that behavior.
What about mental health? How important is mental health?
Yeah, mental health is a huge issue on our campuses for many reasons. Think about some of the truths that we know. Number one, depression is an extraordinary part of adolescence. We know that other mental health related conditions, especially when we look at our psychotic disorders, really start to emerge in the late teens, early 20s. That's much of our population. And so folks that may not have had mental health conditions, or at least not all that observable in high school, when they come here with the additional stress, with all the things that can come, good and bad. This is a wonderful place. It's an awesome opportunity. It's scary. It's isolating in many cases. And then as they start to deteriorate, we may not see it. So we need to really reach out to our residential hall employees, our resources. We need to work with our human resources folks. We need to work with our faculty who spend several hours a week with people who will see things start to occur, and then they'll call us. And then we'll start to look at what can we do to help. I was working with a particular dean yesterday. We met and was describing some things that a student was doing that was frankly scaring one of the faculty. And as we looked at it, I don't believe that this person's on the path. We'll explore. I believe there's other things going on. So now, how can I go down the hall and talk to student support and get them involved? How do we go across campus and get Engelman to get involved? And the nice thing is, all of the groups are very, very responsive. So now we create a strategy to match this person, and then we go back and revisit. In most areas, mental health is not as significant as it is here, but we have so many students in such a small area. Statistically, we're no better, no worse than anybody else, but it's a big deal in our campuses. And so we are working diligently with our partners, with Keck, with Engelman, with our student support. How do we get out to folks early? Our residential folks, Res Ed, is just a great resource as well.
So if you decide after this evaluation that someone is a serious threat, right, what are the steps you can take at that point? Well,
we have a lot of possible interventions. Everything from removal, but remember, just because you kick somebody off campus doesn't mean the threat went away. So part of what we do is we have very good relationships then with our Los Angeles Police Department Threat Management Unit. We have a very good relationship with LA County SMART team, the school, START team, SMART, LAPD, but START, School Threat Assessment and Response team. And what we'll end up doing in some cases is help folks get medical care. We have, with DPS, again, Sergeant Voigt has been a great resource. We have had folks 5150 put in for an involuntary 72-hour hold, and then we start to apply the psychological opportunities for them and get them. We don't very often have to go to things like arrest. I've only been here, what, 8 months now. I don't think we've arrested anybody for being imminently dangerous, but we've had some remarkable situations.
Any that you can talk about?
Not really.
I understand. I figured that was the question, but you teased me there, so I had to ask. One of the other things Sergeant Voigt said was a new system for tracking cases came into effect, in the last year and a half or so, or making sure that they're tracked. Tell me about that. Why is that so important?
Well, especially when we look at things like mental health, we see the same people popping up over and over again. And so what we started trying to do is tracking kind of seems secretive, but it's the ability to gather information and to hang on to information. So let's say that we have a person of concern. We'll make it a student just for sake of discussion. We have a student of concern who has a mental health condition. We get them resources. We get them into the system. We get them so they're moving along. They're being successful in their classes. And then 2 years from now, they decide to quit taking their medications. And they start to deteriorate. Yeah, and they deteriorate. They start to exhibit the same behaviors of concern. Well, now we have this ability to go back and say, wait a minute, now I get it. Let's go back and look at some of the resources that worked. One of the questions we always ask is, what worked in the past? Let's use the things that have worked. What didn't work? Why did it fail? Let's make sure we don't do those. And it helps us identify those folks. And we have some frequent flyers, for whatever we want to call them. We see some people over and over again, even in my short time. And so we call it tracking, but it really is paying attention to behaviors. It also does some interesting things. It allows us to see areas of concern. Are we getting more than what we'd think out of a particular population, whether it's a particular school, whether it's a particular group? Are we seeing a particular condition show up? Mental health is remarkable. We brought in a speaker, my office brought in a speaker talking about folks on the spectrum. And as we look at spectrum disorders and how they manifest, and how can we most effectively work with and support people, and how might it present in a way that might scare and intimidate others. We're looking at bringing in speakers on a regular basis, not only for our team, but also for the university population as a whole to learn from these things.
In the current climate now, we've seen so many threats at schools, we've seen tragically attacks at schools. Is this more important now than ever?
Yeah, it has to be. I always wonder, is it getting better, getting worse, the same? And I think statistically we're seeing that it's worse now. Not only does it appear to be more frequent, but the devastation is so much bigger. And so now we've got two very, very powerful things that have come together. One is that it does appear we are at more risk than we might have been in the past. And number two, whether at risk or not, people are scared. It's hard to turn on the TV. It's hard to read the newspaper without having some recent event that scares the hell out of folks. And what we have to do is recognize that as a university, we are exposed. Not just because we have a population of 65,000 when you look at our faculty, staff, students, but we're in a large community where people are looking to cause harm. We don't just monitor and pay attention to students. We spend a lot of time and energy paying attention to folks that are making vile kinds of comments about our faculty, that are making incredible kinds of statements and threatening statements about our staff. We have folks out there that pose a risk. And so I think we have a very robust approach to recognizing it. But it feels worse. It does. And I think what we're going to find is that every university has something. We want to make sure we have the best. And what we do, on one hand, it's nice to be looked up, but most of all, I just want to make sure everyone here goes home every day. I want students to come here and grow. I don't mind weird. I don't mind different. I don't accept threatening and dangerous. And so we've got that very kind of interesting challenge to encourage free speech, to encourage, you know, this diversity of thought and action and growth, and at the same time ensure that we have a safe place for people to come and thrive.
That is a great answer, and one that I really appreciate you saying. I also wanted to ask you a little bit, at the very top you said one of the reasons, the big reasons that you were brought in was because of the professor who was murdered here on campus, and I know that happened before your time, but what lessons have been learned from that?
I wasn't here, so I obviously I've been briefed, I've read a lot. I think what we learn across the country, and actually I don't want to speak specifically to that one for a number of reasons, but what we learned in most situations, and I think it might apply here as well, is that often the left hand and right hand don't communicate well. And we call it the siloization of information. We call it a number of things, connecting the dots. And I think what has happened historically is that somebody has threat. Somebody else has behaviors of concern. Somebody else has disruption. Somebody else has academic integrity. And what ends up happening is when somebody is truly deteriorating, when they're losing the ability to function, we're going to see a little bit in all of those areas. What we're trying to do here through my office is make sure all of these talk to each other sooner. And that's really what Sergeant Voigt is talking about with the tracking. I don't know, we call it a tracking system, so I get the word, but what we want to do is make sure that we all pay attention. And so what looks like a little thing in each of these 5 or 6 areas turns out really to be significant. We can intervene much more quickly. And I think what has happened in the past, it may have happened here, is that we didn't know because all the pieces weren't put together in one place. That's the biggest challenge.
Those are all the questions I have. Is there anything else that you want to say?
Yeah, I guess this is my belief. It is a hard, scary world when you look at a lot of things go on. It's a beautiful, wonderful, exciting world when you look at some of the things going on. We want USC to be a place where people can enjoy, to thrive, to connect. It's not just a slogan. If this truly is a Trojan family and a world-class university, then people like me and the folks that work with me will do our role to allow other folks to thrive, to enjoy, to grow. And like I mentioned, I went to USC. My mom and dad came to USC. My son graduated here. We love SC. This is a good place for people to come and grow. And my job is to help make sure they're able to do that.